started with a knock. Not the kind of knock you'd expect. Someone pounding at your door late at night. No, this was softer, quieter, as if someone didn't want to be heard. It was so faint at first that I convinced myself it was the wind. I was sitting alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, the only light coming from the muted television. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and the world outside was quiet. Too quiet. No cars, no late-night chatter from the bar down the street. Not even the hum of the city that usually filled the nights. Just that knock. I turned the volume up on the TV, trying to drown it out. It worked for a while. But then it came again, 3 soft, deliberate taps. I froze. My heart was beating faster now, but I still refused to move. My apartment complex was old. The pipes rattled. The walls creaked. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. A few minutes passed, and I began to relax again, almost laughing at myself. It was probably my overactive imagination getting the best of me, mixed with lack of sleep. I tried to go back to watching the late-night rerun playing on the TV, but that's when I heard it again, this time louder. I grabbed my phone off the couch, my hands trembling slightly. No missed calls, no messages. I didn't want to answer. Something in my gut told me to stay put, but there was a part of me, maybe curiosity or just stubbornness, that wouldn't let me ignore it. I got up and walked to the door, moving slowly, deliberately. The hallway light was off, but a faint glow from the streetlight outside illuminated the edges of the door. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty hallway, trying to process what was happening. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, the knocks ringing out from behind the door, louder and more aggressive than before. Still, no one was there. I backed away, the cold dread settling deep in my chest. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was kids playing a prank, maybe someone hiding just out of sight. But as I stood there, I began to realize something strange. The knocking hadn't come from the door. It had come from inside the apartment. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the door in disbelief. The knocking, it had been so distinct, so deliberate, but how could it have come from inside? My apartment wasn't that big. There was nowhere someone could hide. The living room was open, the kitchen just a small corner off to the side. The only other room was the bathroom, and it was empty. I had checked it earlier. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it from the shock. A message flashed on the screen from my neighbor, Sarah, who lived down the hall. "Did you hear that?" My fingers fumbled over the keyboard as I quickly typed back, "Hear what?" "The knocking." I swear it sounded like someone was knocking on my door, but when I looked, no one was there. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just me. Someone or something was knocking on the doors of this building. I hesitated before responding. It happened here too. There was knocking, but no one's outside. I checked. 3 little dots appeared, showing that she was typing. I waited, my heart still racing, wondering if she'd experienced the same feeling I had. That suffocating sense of something wrong, something off. But before she could finish typing, the sound returned. This time, it came from the wall to my left, the one that separated my apartment from Sarah's. The knocking echoed through the room, louder than before, as if it was angry, frustrated. I ran to the wall, pressing my ear against it, but there was only silence on the other side. My phone buzzed again. "I'm scared," Sarah had typed. I didn't know what to say because I was scared too. Something wasn't right about this place, something beyond the natural. Then, without warning, the lights in my apartment flickered. First just a slight dimming, like a power surge, but then the light bulb in the kitchen popped, sending a brief flash of sparks before plunging the room into semi-darkness. Only the dim glow from the TV remained. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the screen, something moved. It was just for a split second, a blur at the edge of my vision, but it was there. A shadow shifting in the corner of the room, just beyond where the light could reach. I spun around, expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly backed away, my legs trembling beneath me. I had always been skeptical of the supernatural, dismissing stories of ghosts and hauntings as figments of overactive imaginations. But this was real, too real. I could feel it. Something was here with me and it was playing a game. Suddenly, my phone lit up again, the bright screen piercing through the darkness. It was Sarah. Get out. Now. The message made my heart stop. There was no further explanation, no time to ask why. Just those 3 words. Get out. Now. I didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing my keys from the table, I bolted towards the door, every instinct screaming at me to leave this place. But as my hand reached the doorknob, the knocking returned. This time louder, more frantic. The sound wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was coming from inside the apartment, behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my eyes scanning the dark room. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps now, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. And then I saw it again, the shadow. It was darker than the rest of the room, more solid, and it was moving towards me. I backed up against the door, my hand fumbling for the lock, but before I could turn it, the TV flickered and went black, plunging the room into complete darkness. And that's when I heard it breathing. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. Someone, no something, was in the room with me, its breath shallow and ragged, like it had been waiting for me this whole time. The air grew colder, and I could feel a presence moving closer, its invisible gaze fixed on me. Slamming the door shut behind me, I flicked the light switch and thankfully, the bulb flickered to life, casting the small room in a harsh, sterile glow. I caught my reflection in the mirror, my face pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear. But something was wrong. As I stared at myself, I realized there was something behind me. Something standing in the doorway, a shadow, impossibly tall and thin, its face obscured, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. Nothing was there. When I turned back to the mirror, the shadow was gone. But the door, my way out, was wide open. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the knocking, the breathing, the presence moving through my apartment like it was searching for something. By morning, I was ready to leave. But as I reached for the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the wood, just above the handle, were 3 words. You're not alone. The knocking never stopped. Then I saw it again, just a flicker in the corner of my vision. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, standing in the doorway, watching me. My breath hitched. This was no trick of the light. Something was there. I let go of the handle and backed away, my feet stumbling over each other as I hurried down the dim corridor. The walls seemed to close in on me, the familiar route to the stairwell stretching out like a tunnel. The building felt wrong, like it had shifted overnight. As I reached the stairwell, I didn't even glance back. The heavy metal door creaked as I pushed it open, and the narrow staircase yawned before me, bathed in a sickly yellow light that flickered as if on the verge of dying. I descended, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding against my ribs, faster and faster. And yet, over the sound of my steps, I could hear something else, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from above. The steps grew louder, closer. Someone or something was following me. I swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic, and quickened my pace. As I descended, the footsteps above matched mine, but they didn't sound rushed or panicked. No, they were calm, patient, like whatever was behind me knew I couldn't escape. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I didn't dare look up. I managed to run out into the streets. For a moment, the world outside seemed normal. The streetlights bathed the empty sidewalk in a warm, familiar glow. The hum of distant traffic was a welcome contrast to the suffocating silence of the stairwell. I paused, leaning against the wall of the building, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning. What the hell was happening? As I stood there, I felt a strange sensation, like being watched, but not by anyone visible. I glanced around, expecting to see someone on the street, but it was empty. No late-night joggers, no cars passing by, not even the occasional stray cat. The entire block was still, almost frozen in time. Then, without warning, I heard the door behind me creak open. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tense. The door to my building, which I had slammed shut, was now ajar. Through the crack, I could see nothing but darkness. No light spilling out from the lobby, no sign of life. Just a void. Something was in there and it had followed me. The door creaked open wider, as if inviting me back in. I took a step away, my heart hammering in my chest. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I grabbed it quickly, desperate for a distraction, for anything to ground me in reality. It was a message from Sarah, but it wasn't what I expected. "Let it in," the message read. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Let it in? What was she talking about? Was she in danger? Or worse, was she in on it? Before I could respond, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, making me jump. The sound echoed through the empty street, and for a moment, everything was silent again. I stood there, paralyzed, torn between fleeing and going back to confront whatever had been in that building. Another message. "It's already with you." I stared at the screen, my hand trembling, and as I lowered the phone, I saw something, a reflection, in the glass window of the building in front of me. A shape standing right behind me, something dark, tall, and watching. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible, but my legs refused to move. My eyes stayed locked on the reflection, the shape slowly becoming clearer as it stood motionless behind me. It was taller than any person should be, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its head cocked slightly to one side, as if studying me. The shadows clung to its form, refusing to let me see any more detail. But I could feel it. Its presence was suffocating, filling the space between us with a cold, unbearable pressure. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I turned around. The street was empty. Nothing was there. I blinked, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. The reflection had been clear as day, but now, in the empty street, there was no sign of the figure. I spun back to the window, hoping I had imagined it, but the reflection had changed. Now it was just me, standing alone under the streetlight. I couldn't explain it, but I knew the thing hadn't left. It was still here, somewhere, watching. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. Another message from Sarah. "It's inside you now." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What did that mean? Inside me? My stomach churned, and a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread took hold. I tried to think back, tried to recall when things had started to go wrong. The knocking, the strange movements in the shadows, the cold, suffocating feeling. None of it made sense. But one thing was clear. This thing, whatever it was, had marked me. It was no longer just following me. It was part of me, As the realization settled in, a sharp pain shot through my chest, making me gasp. My vision blurred for a moment, and I stumbled, catching myself on a nearby lamppost. The pain spread, a deep, burning sensation, as though something was moving inside me, crawling beneath my skin. My hands trembled as I looked down, half expecting to see something, anything, beneath the surface. Nothing, but I could feel it. Something was there. Something had entered me. The street around me began to warp, the edges of my vision darkening, twisting. It was as if the world itself was distorting, becoming unfamiliar. I clutched my head, trying to steady myself, but the pain only grew worse. And then, in the silence, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time it wasn't outside. It was coming from within me. The knocking inside me reverberated like a drumbeat in my chest, each strike sending waves of icy terror through my body. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but with each passing moment, it grew louder, more insistent. I clutched at my chest, desperate to silence the noise, but it wasn't something I could escape. The sound wasn't just in my head. It was real, it was inside me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I stumbled down the empty street, away from the building, away from the reflection that had shown me something I couldn't unsee. But no matter how far I got, the knocking remained, steady, unyielding. It was as if the thing inside me was trying to communicate, to announce its presence, and every part of my mind screamed in protest. How could something be inside me? How had this happened? My phone buzzed again. My hands shook as I pulled it out, half dreading what Sarah, or whoever was sending these messages, had to say next. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know. But I couldn't help myself. I had to look. The screen lit up with another message, the words simple but terrifying. Let it out. I dropped the phone, the clattering sound echoing down the deserted street. Let it out? How? What was it? How could I let it out when I didn't even understand what had been done to me? A sharp pain shot through my head, a blinding white-hot sensation that nearly made me collapse. I doubled over, clutching my skull as the world spun around me. For a moment, I felt like I was slipping away, like I was losing control of my own body. My fingers twitched involuntarily, and my vision flickered, replaced by strange, disjointed images. Shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, figures I couldn't quite make out, and flashes of dark, twisted places I had never seen before. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to stop, to make sense again. But instead I heard a voice. It wasn't my own, but it came from within me, low and guttural, barely a whisper. Let me out. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs, my pulse roaring in my ears. The voice, it wasn't mine, it couldn't be, but it was there, crawling inside my mind, seeping into my thoughts. My hands trembled, and I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. Let me out. It whispered again, this time louder, more demanding. The thing inside me wasn't going to be silenced. It was growing stronger, feeding off my fear. And it wanted something I couldn't give it. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from everything. Away from the building, away from the street, away from the terror clawing at my insides. My legs pumped furiously beneath me, carrying me through the dark, empty streets. But no matter how fast I ran, the knocking persisted, louder now, pounding through my entire body. Let me out! The voice roared, no longer a whisper, but a demand. I could feel something shifting inside me, something writhing beneath my skin. The pressure in my chest intensified, like something was clawing its way to the surface, desperate to break free. My vision blurred again, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. I had to stop, had to catch my breath. I found myself near a park, its shadowy trees looming over me like silent sentinels. I staggered into the darkness, away from the streetlights, and collapsed onto a bench. My entire body was trembling, and the pain was unbearable now, like something was trying to tear its way out of me. I clutched my stomach, gasping for air, feeling my body convulse as the thing inside me thrashed. Then, with a horrible, twisting sensation, I felt it move upward. My throat tightened, my body seizing as whatever was inside clawed its way up, pushing against my lungs, my ribs. I choked, struggling to breathe, my fingers digging into the bench as I fought to stay conscious. It was coming. Whatever had entered me was about to break free. I doubled over, retching, and for a brief moment, I thought I might vomit. But nothing came out. Only darkness. A thick, oily blackness that spilled from my lips, pooling onto the ground beneath me. It smelled rancid, like decay and rot, and as it oozed from my mouth, I could see something moving within it, something alive. The shadows in the park seemed to shift and writhe as the blackness spread, tendrils of darkness snaking across the ground. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs gave out beneath me. All I could do was watch as the blackness coalesced, forming a shape, a figure, tall, thin, just like the one I had seen in the reflection. It stood before me now, rising from the pool of darkness like a nightmare made flesh. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its gaze, cold and ancient, burning into me. For a moment, the world seemed to. The thing that stood before me was no longer part of me, but I could still feel its presence lingering, its influence heavy in the air. The darkness it had spilled from me seeped into the ground, as if the very earth drank it in. I sat there, gasping for air, feeling the weight of its words settle over me like a shroud. I didn't respond, couldn't. My body was still shaking, my mind barely comprehending what had just happened. The creature, or whatever it was, tilted its head, as if studying me, its form shifting and pulsing with unnatural fluidity. "You opened the door," it said, its voice low and grating, as if it hadn't spoken in centuries. "Now you cannot close it." I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed back onto the bench, my body weak and drained. Took a step closer, its form dissolving into the shadows and then reappearing, inches from where I sat. I could feel its cold presence like a fog, suffocating and oppressive. What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice hoarse and weak. It didn't answer. Instead, it leaned closer, its featureless face hovering inches from mine. The shadows around us seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. "You have no choice now," it whispered. "We are bound." I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and as it did, a searing pain shot through me. I screamed, clutching at my arm, but when I looked down, there was nothing there. No wound, no mark. Only the sensation, the knowledge, that this thing had left its mark on me in a way I couldn't see. The creature straightened, its form once again dissolving into the night. But before it disappeared completely, it left me with one final, chilling promise. "You are mine now," and just like that, it was gone. But the knocking had never left. For a long time, I just sat there, staring into the dark, trying to process what had just happened. My body felt foreign, like it no longer belonged to me. My breath came in ragged bursts, my chest tight with an invisible weight pressing down on me. I had let it out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that, in doing so, I'd let something else in. The park around me was deathly quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The creature was gone, or at least I couldn't see it anymore, but I still felt its presence, lingering just out of sight, in the corners of my vision, in the places the light couldn't reach. The coldness it had left behind was seeping into me, twisting through my veins, settling deep in my bones. I had to get up. I had to move, do something before I completely lost control. But as I stood, my legs felt weak, trembling as though they were carrying someone else's weight. The pain in my chest hadn't disappeared either. It was duller now, but there, a constant reminder of what had transpired. I stumbled out of the park, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting the shadowy figure to reappear. The streets were eerily empty, devoid of life, the usual hum of the city absent. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my phone. Maybe Sarah could help, maybe she knew more than she was letting on. But when I looked down at the screen, my blood ran cold. The last message she'd sent, the one that said, "Let it out," was gone. In fact, there were no messages from her at all. The conversation, the warnings, everything had vanished. I tried calling her, my fingers shaking as I tapped her number, but it went straight to voicemail. I redialed. Same result. I felt panic rising in my throat. Had it gotten to her too? Was she even real? The world around me was unraveling, the lines between reality and something darker blurring. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I jumped, nearly dropping it. Another message. But it wasn't from Sarah. It was from me. I stared at the screen, my name at the top of the message thread. But I hadn't typed anything. My fingers hovered over the phone, hesitant, but the curiosity, the fear, forced me to open it. "I told you we were bound." I dropped the phone in shock, the clatter echoing in the empty street. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. The message was from me, from inside me, sent by whatever was now part of me. I backed away from the phone as if it were cursed. The thing, whatever it was, had control. It was speaking through me, using my body, my thoughts. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but there was no one here, no one who could understand what I was dealing with. And then I heard it again, that faint, rhythmic sound, coming from somewhere deep within me. My whole body tensed. The knocking hadn't stopped. It had just changed, become more subtle, more insidious. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, an awareness that was spreading through every corner of my mind. I sank to my knees, pressing my hands to my temples, trying to block it out. But it was no use. The knocking grew louder, more demanding, filling my skull with its constant rhythm. And then, something even worse began to happen. I felt my thoughts slipping. Memories, feelings, they were fading, slipping through my grasp like sand through fingers. My name, my past, everything I had been, it was receding, replaced by something darker, something older. The creature had told me we were bound, and now I understood what it meant. It wasn't just inside me, it was taking me. I could feel it, stealing bits and pieces of my identity, absorbing them, twisting them into something unrecognizable. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. I could barely remember why I had come outside, where I had been before the park. My name. What was my name? The knocking. The endless knocking. I was becoming a hollow vessel, an echo of who I once was. And as my mind drifted into that abyss, I knew that soon there would be nothing left of me at all. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up in the middle of the street, drowning in the relentless sound of that knocking. Felt like hours, maybe days. Time had become meaningless. The world around me had dimmed. The city swallowed by shadows that I could no longer distinguish from the darkness growing inside me. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. Not because I wanted to, but because it wanted me to. My body moved with an eerie stiffness, like a puppet on invisible strings, guided by something that had long since taken control. I walked aimlessly, down streets I didn't recognize, past buildings that felt alien to me. My legs moved, but I didn't feel connected to them. I was merely a passenger now, watching through my own eyes as something else piloted my body. I tried to speak, to shout for help, but my voice wouldn't obey. The knocking had grown quieter now, not because it had stopped, but because it no longer needed to demand attention. It had already done its job. I had been claimed. I didn't know where I was going or why. The creature inside me, the shadow, it had a purpose. I could feel it pushing me forward. And though I couldn't understand what it wanted, I knew it was leading me somewhere dark. Eventually, I reached an old, abandoned building at the edge of town. The windows were broken, the doors hanging off their hinges. It looked like it had been forgotten for decades, reclaimed by time. Yet, as I stood there, staring up at its crumbling facade, I felt a strange sense of recognition. I had never been here before, and yet, I knew this place. My feet moved forward, the decision not mine. I stepped through the rotting doorway and into the darkness within. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp and decay. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked beneath my weight. And in the center of the room I saw it. A mirror. It stood tall, covered in dust and grime, its surface cracked and distorted. I walked toward it, compelled by some force I couldn't resist. And as I neared, I saw my reflection, or at least what was left of it. The person staring back at me wasn't me. The face was mine, but the eyes were hollow, dark, consumed by the shadows that had taken root inside me. The reflection smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy or relief. It was the smile of something ancient, something that had finally found a home. And then, in the silence of that decrepit room, the knocking returned. But this time it wasn't coming from inside me. It was coming from the mirror. The reflection raised its hand, mimicking my own movements. But as I stared in horror, its other hand, one I hadn't moved, began tapping against the glass. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, the reflection's smile widening into something grotesque. And then, slowly, deliberately, it whispered the words I had been dreading all along. "Let me in." I turned to run, but it was too late. The mirror shattered, and the world went black. When I woke, I was no longer the person I had been. I stood in the wreckage of the old building, surrounded by shards of glass, the mirror completely destroyed. But as I looked around, I realized that the world had changed. Or perhaps it was me. I walked to the nearest reflective surface, a broken window, its jagged edges reflecting back a twisted version of myself. My eyes were dark now, empty, and in the distance I could still hear it. Knock, knock, knock. I had let it in. And now there was no escape, because I wasn't alone anymore. I was never alone again. I wandered through the streets, no longer feeling the weight of my own body. I was a ghost in my own skin, my movements slow and mechanical, driven by something that wasn't me anymore. The city felt distant, a faded backdrop to a nightmare I could never wake from. Every surface I passed, every window, every piece of glass, showed me the same hollow reflection, a twisted version of myself staring back with that same smile, the same dark eyes. And always there was the knocking. It never stopped, never grew quieter. It was part of me now, as constant as my heartbeat, if I even had one left. The knocking was the beat of my soul, what was left of it. Whatever had taken hold of me, whatever I had let in, it wasn't done yet. It was waiting, pulling me toward something, guiding me toward a final confrontation. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself standing outside an old, familiar building. My apartment complex. The one I had fled from that night. It looked the same as before, but something about it felt wrong, darker somehow, like it had absorbed the terror that had taken place within its walls. I walked up the steps without hesitation, my feet moving of their own accord. The door creaked open at my touch, and the stale air inside hit me like a wave. It was silent, too silent. I stepped into the hallway, the dim lights flickering above me. The walls seemed to close in as I made my way to my apartment, the last place where I had felt even a shred of control. When I reached the door, I froze. Scratched into the wood, just like before, were those words, "You're not alone." Only this time, there was something new beneath it, freshly carved, the letters jagged and crude. "We are waiting." My hand hovered over the doorknob, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I hesitated. I knew what was inside. I knew that whatever awaited me behind that door was the end of everything. The end of me. But there was no choice. I had come this far. There was no turning back now. I twisted the knob and stepped inside. The room was just as I had left it. The couch, the flickering TV, the broken kitchen light casting long shadows. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. And in the center of the room, sitting in the dim light, was the mirror. The same mirror from the abandoned building. Only now it was whole again. I stared at it, my pulse quickening, though I couldn't tell if it was fear or resignation. The reflection in the glass wasn't me. Not anymore. It was the thing that had followed me, the thing that had bound itself to me. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, watching me with an intensity that chilled my blood. The sound came from the mirror now, echoing through the room, relentless. My reflection smiled at me, and then, slowly, it lifted its hand and knocked on the glass from the inside. I stepped forward, drawn toward it as though pulled by invisible strings. I knelt before the mirror, staring into the eyes of the thing I had become. My own hand lifted, mimicking the reflection, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the glass. And then, from behind me, I heard the door creak open. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. The shadows that had followed me, that had taken root inside me, were no longer content to hide. I could feel them gathering around me, pressing in from all sides. The air grew colder, and the knocking grew louder, pounding in my ears, in my chest, in my mind. The reflection leaned closer, its smile widening into something grotesque. "It's time," it whispered, its voice a sickening echo of my own. "Let us in." I stared at the thing that was once me, at the thing that had claimed me, and I knew that there was no escape. I had opened the door that night, and now I would pay the price. With trembling hands, I pressed my palm flat against the mirror. The glass was cold, so cold it burned. But I didn't pull away. Couldn't. I was bound to this thing now, a prisoner in my own body. The glass cracked beneath my touch, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across the surface. And then, with a deafening shatter, the mirror broke, the pieces falling away to reveal not darkness, but a doorway. Beyond it, I could see shadows moving, alive, shifting, watching. The knocking had stopped now, replaced by a deep, resonant silence that filled the room. The thing inside me was waiting. I could feel its hunger, its anticipation. It had won. I stepped forward, crossing the threshold. And as I did, the door behind me slammed shut.